Sarah Ratay has spent 25 years working in botany and conservation. She studied the rare plants of the California Islands for a master's project at UCLA and helped with conservation projects in the amazing Baja Peninsula. Moving to the other end of the California floristic province, Sarah's job is a never boring mix of prescribed fire, implementation, maintenance of an off-grid field station, fence repair, and a lot of snow plowing. She is an active member of the Klamath Basin chapter of the Native Plant Society of Oregon. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks so much. All right, I'm going to start the screen share. Seems like a really great board. I wish we had as many interested people. We got to build our capacity out here. Let me just do the. Great. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It's really great that folks all the way, 5.5 hours away in Portland are interested in hearing about this preserve. And it's a really fun place to share. It's so I live and work on the preserve. Got some maps here because I think that'll be helpful for people. So the preserve is kind of at the star here between Lake and Klamath County line. The preserve is over 30,000 acres. And here's just a couple maps of the layout of the preserve. You can see that we're surrounded by the Fremont-Wainema National Forest almost completely, and they're important partners for our conservation work out here. So Sycan Marsh Preserve. So, first of all, the area was historically inhabited and managed by the Klamath, Modoc, and Yahuskin people, along with other folks. I've heard historically people would use the area seasonally too. So, and we try to be good partners in managing the land with the people that have for a very long time, and consult as much as we can. The TNC Preserve was created in 1980 by land purchase from the ZX Ranch to protect the biodiversity of the region. Especially, the targets were endemic and rare aquatic invertebrates, fish, and migrating waterfowl. And there's also some really cool special plant communities. And since I'm a botanist by background, I'm going to mostly focus on that. One of the fun things about this preserve is that I had this book, textbook, Measuring and Monitoring Plant Populations, for about 10 years before I got the job here. And I didn't realize we were the cover photo. So that's a wildflower field from Sycan Marsh Preserve that's on the cover of this textbook. And I don't know how many people on the call have seen it, but it's a really fundamental for doing plant ecology work in the field. Dan Salzer was here originally and was one of the authors. So he had worked at Sycan Marsh before. And we've had just amazing people come through and work in this place and leave their legacy. And I just hope I can continue to caretake and steward this preserve as, into the future as best I can. So in terms of native plants for our plant list for the preserve, there's 395 plant taxa on the species list and about 2/3 native. Since I've been here 4.5 years ago, I've incidentally found 15 new plant species for the list without even trying. So I think there is quite a bit more collecting, and this area of Oregon could handle a lot more botany visitors. So and a lot more documentation. So we'll be talking about that a little bit at the end. Remind me, we have a field trip coming up that I want to make sure to mention. So we have overall a pretty low cover of invasive plants. We do have a few species that are here, but I think it's a pretty inhospitable place year round for most invasive plant species. And we have a really intact the native plant species are dense enough that they can hopefully resist some invasion, though we definitely have some problem areas that I continue to work on. But overall about 90% native plant cover versus non-native. And one of the other things that was cited in our conservation action plan from when the preserve was founded was that we had the best remaining example of a tufted hairgrass meadow community in Oregon. I'm willing to see other wonderful tufted hairgrass meadow communities, but it's a really lovely plant species to have in like landscape scale on this preserve. And I just wanted to throw in a bunch of plant pictures for everybody, because that's, what I go to talks for. So I'm going to move my little Zoom window out of the way. So, seasonally, our prime time here, because we're up at 5,000 feet elevation, is, May and June, even until July, before some of these plant species start coming up and flowering. And we also, just the intact plant habitats. So I don't know if can you guys see my cursor, Gina? Anyway, there's an example of tufted hairgrass there that you can kind of see, but a lovely native grass meadow. And I have a dog coworker that is an excellent backdrop for plant flower pictures. So she's an important part of the team. We also, on the preserve, we have an outplanting of the rarest grass in Oregon, the Oregon semaphore grass. And so the two historic, pre-existing unplanted populations are there on the Oregon flora map. And then we're in another site where the outplanting was done to try to bulk up the population and also to just experiment with outplanting methods. The populations aren't doing great with the years of drought here in the Klamath Basin, but we're happy to try to contribute to preservation of this really cool grass. So I will touch on challenges throughout the talk. It's a big place and there's lots to do. One of the things that has been really hard lately is drought. Tonight we're getting about 10 inches of snow, so I'm hopeful that maybe we will move out of drought status, but we'll see when it all settles out. The preserve had 41 years of a grazing lease that existed on the certain parts of the preserve, and so every summer there would be grazing. That lease ended last year. And then there are also trespass cattle because the forest is grazed around us, but I'll talk more about that in a minute. Invasive plant species, like I mentioned, and altered fire regimes and intensity, which I will also get into more. So the field station that I'm sitting in right now is, so it's 4,000 square feet. There's lots of guest rooms, so people should come visit. We're off grid, so this morning, my first job task was to go sweep up the snow off the solar panels with my dog. She's essential. And, keeping this place running well and hosting people, even though we're up, 5,000 feet, getting a lot of snow. We also have composting toilets and other, interesting off-grid strategies. It's a challenge, but it's pretty cool to be able to show people what you can do with really great building technology. So we have hosted in the past, we've had 90 people here for a fish meeting one year. They would camp around the field station and then actually had meetings in this room that I'm speaking from. We also host quite a bit of fire researchers and firefighters during the fall season when we do prescribed fire implementation and when they set up research plots to, in the areas that we will be burning. It's pretty fun to have this many people and to have, sometimes we'll have a caterer and stuff, and all of that is done off grid. So quite a bit of facilities work to make that happen. We're able to do the prescribed fire work that we do with a great group of volunteers. Hopefully some of them are on the call, and then our staff from all over Oregon. And the fire researchers often will provide a hand with the fire implementation, and because they're doing research on how they will first model how fire will move through a given stand of trees, and then they will have drones up that actually monitor the fire as it moves through. They're often involved in the ignitions on their test plots just to make sure we get the right type of ignition happening. And so it's pretty fun and challenging to do prescribed fire implementation with all of the challenges of that, and also do research on the ground. And we've got a really wonderful burn boss, Katie Sauerbrey, that's just essential to the work that we do out here. And it's pretty fun to work with folks from the fire lab and Forest Service and stuff, because it's easier for us to, we have a lot less red tape. And so it's an important role for us, is just to help share information about how prescribed fire can be done and studied on the ground. We also have wildlife. I had some volunteers out this is a nearby reservoir to the preserve, and he saw this wolf that was hunting with a couple coyotes along the lake edge. They were hunting birds, and so it was just a really amazing shot that Dave got. And we see elk out here. They're pretty wary, but they definitely use the landscape. It's fun to see their tracks all over. There's everything. There's mountain lions, there's bears, it's really fun. And we have really amazing crane and swan populations that come through, as well as other migratory waterfowl. Back to the plants. So yeah, I'll talk briefly about some of the plant communities on the preserve, just to give you some idea. So the preserve, so the outer sort of like upper ring of the preserve is a ponderosa pine and lodgepole pine woodland. And then we've got some on the east side in pink there, we've got the like sage shrublands, where there's a lot of exposed bedrocks. Around here they call it sometimes scablands. We've also got this huge wetland here, the Thule wetland, that's really interesting. And there's a lot to understand hydrologically that I don't know yet. So if anybody has thoughts about that, let me know. We can get into that more in a minute. There's also aspen grows scattered throughout the preserve. And the bulk of the preserve are sort of in this wet, dry meadow grouping that they were put into. And I'll show you some pictures of those. So the sage shrubland is probably my favorite plant community, just because right when I need spring to happen, the snow has melted and things start flowering there. And it's just really interesting to see in each little pocket of sage scrub has a little bit different plant communities between the two. And I'm still trying to observe and understand the patterns of that, but I find it delightful to go see what's growing in each place. And then, sometimes I find plants like this Balsamorhiza. We think maybe we found a species for it. I haven't even had time to key the penstemon yet, but, these are plants that as I'm doing my very eclectic job, I get to see all these cool plant species on the ground and try to ID them and share observations in iNaturalist. And I'm also, really interested in invertebrate populations. And so I don't know if Frank wants to share. I think he knew what this butterfly was. Maybe we'll just do that at the end. That might be easier, but I'm trying to document as much as I can in iNaturalist, but I also, I'm hoping to find some people, especially the specialists in invertebrates, to come out and.
Yeah, I'd love to visit and see the invertebrates. I believe this is a moth. The common name is forester moth, but I don't know the species.
Okay, sorry to put you on the spot, but good job. So yeah, it's a wonderful place to get to share with people, and because of the prescribed firework and other management, we've got some really really incredible habitat to share with people, and it's just fun to do that part of my job too. So we also have a fen on the preserve, Henderson fen. And it's, I never interacted with a fen like this before. And it's just such a delight to see the changing water levels, the very unique plant species that just occur in the fen on the preserve, and really, you know, for hundreds of miles around, this is the only place they occur. I've been learning more about fens. So Rick Dewey just gave a talk to the High Desert chapter of NPSO about fens, which everybody should try to get him to talk to their group, because it was fascinating to talk about how the basically the eruption of Mount Mazama laid down a layer that's impermeable to water movement, and that's part of why there's a perched water table in, and that's what causes these fens. So we also have quite a bit of groundwater coming into this. So there's 177 donut springs. I'll show you in a minute what that looks like throughout the fen, and so you can see them mapped here within the fen area. So the whole, you know, the whole fen itself is 162 acres of wetland in the middle of the marsh. So here I'll point out, so the field station is here, this big Thule wetland is here, and the fen is this small feature that I still, you know, I have more questions than I have answers about why it occurs where it does. Hopefully we'll get Rick out this year to check it out. And so, I was just going to show like this, for example, this bog bean, you know, looking at the distribution in Oregon flora, we're sort of the only population on the east side of the Cascades, on the south end of the state. So thinking about that, you know, just that we are the eastern extent of an interesting plant community, basically, to, you know, at least to the south. So this is a donut spring. So they're called that because they're kind of round and hollow in the middle. The spring comes up in the middle. The vegetation is mounded up. The water comes out at hydraulic pressure, so actually can continue to come out of the spring, even though there's vegetation that mounds up around the spring. And this was the Forest Service botany team that came out to check out the fen. And just some cool plant species from the fen that I wanted to share. Just fields of orchids out there. It's great. And carnivorous plants. So there's also these aspen groves just in the middle of the marsh wetland. I just think they're beautiful and interesting. There's quite a bit of elk usage of these, and just interesting places to explore. So the ponderosa pine woodlands are both, you know, beautiful. It's fun to see this transition zone between, you know, the very dry upland and then the wetlands. And then this is the plant community, one of the plant communities that's really important to use fire to manage them. And so our stated goal has been to try to, you know, get a semi-historic fire frequency. So in this area, the estimate is somewhere from 3 to 15 years there would be fires moving through a given location. And so we're trying to burn, like, so this is actually a picture from Bratton Ridge. We've burned that 3 times in the last I think 20 years or something, you know, trying to keep the healthy fire interval in place that we need to manage these for resiliency. And this was a silly picture, but I was walking back from implementing a prescribed fire, still have some smoke on the side, and there was a ruffed grouse just like hanging out on the road, you know, like not fleeing intensely from the fire, but you know, it was interesting to see how, you know, wildlife can interact with the prescribed fire if it's done carefully. And when I've been igniting in units, sometimes there will be groups of deer that just really aren't, you know, scared enough to, you know, flee from us, but just sort of, you know, checking things out. And you know, I don't know enough to understand how, you know, what pre-human fire was like on the landscape, but it's nice to see occasionally in units that we have burned how we can really have moderated fire behavior. And then this Thule wetland, this is just a picture from on the ground. There's been some hydraulic modification in there, as you can see from the straight lines, but it's a really cool spot. And we're looking from the east side over to the west. So, you know, my field station is way over at the foot of Yancey Mountain here. And this is the wetland from Sycan Butte, which is up to the east. We're looking into the Tule wetlands, and you can see it there on the map again. So really interesting landscape feature. It's fun to fly over in a plane and be able to tell exactly where my preserve is, because it's such a interesting high elevation or montane wetland. So I wanted to step back in time and talk to you guys about 2021. It was a challenging year for a lot of reasons. This game camera I put out for wildlife sightings, but we had a bunch of trespass cattle come in, and then we had quite a bit of grasshoppers come in. It's just, you know, it never ceases to surprise you out here. There's always some kind of interesting thing that happens. They're a native grasshopper species that just, you know, varies. The folks from Klamath County see this all the time too. But it actually had an interesting outcome as well, that we had some trespass cattle and high grasshopper density this year, because that 2021, we also had the bootleg fire burn onto the preserve. I've got a map in a minute, but this was the field station during that. And so very intense fire behavior. So record low fuel moistures, which resulted in very extreme fire behavior on the ground. Really, like, you know, some lifelong firefighters just had never seen fire behavior like this. And we definitely saw it on the ground. So this was the outline of the bootleg fire, and you can see it started down here in Fuego Mountain, which isn't on the map, but burned, you know, 400,000 acres, including some of the preserve. And this is a bear map of so this one's vegetation severity. So it's really interesting to actually contrast this. So, you know, very high mortality in the forests. There's definitely some pockets where, you know, trees made it. It's been interesting to see that pattern on the landscape. But, you know, really, as we know, intense mega fires. But, sorry, I'm trying to scroll here. It was working. Okay, there we go. So this is a soil burn severity map that the Forest Service also produced as part of the bear process. And I find it really interesting to compare. So you can have high vegetation mortality and still fairly low soil burn severity. And so what this suggests is that the soil structure, the seeds in the soil, you know, might not be as affected as the top vegetation was. And that fortunately is what we've seen play out on the ground. So I've seen natural ponderosa pine regeneration in these areas that looked so, but I mean, it was all that was left of the pre-existing vegetation was just toothpicks. But young trees came in, wildflowers came in. And so that was really great to see. And so, you know, a little bit of hope with all the stresses that this entire region has had recently. And we've had quite a bit of interest. This is a group of staff just sort of talking about post-fire, our plans, you know, how to implement research on the ground so that we can, you know, share what happened on our preserve. I'll talk about that in a minute. And, you know, use this as continue to use this as a laboratory for learning more about prescribed fire and wildland fire in this arid system. So one of the interested parties was the New York Times. So we had quite a media blitz out here for a little while. It was really interesting to have this super remote place that's like 2 hours from a grocery store, but all of a sudden we have the New York Times coming out to look at our preserve, because what we've done is when we do the prescribed fire that we've been putting on the ground, sometimes also with thinning ahead of time, sometimes just prescribed fire, we found that the bootleg fire interacted with those burned areas very differently than they did areas where we hadn't burned at all. So this is just an example. This is actually, if you get a chance to check out this article, it's pretty cool, but they have a drone shot from above. And so you can see these two forests, no fundamental difference between them except for the management. And so, it's really on the bottom there. It's, there weren't even needles left on the trees. You see there's definitely edge effects of the hot fire across the road, singeing the trees and killing the trees right by the road. And then as you go back just a few 100 feet, you see green, healthy trees. And so in 2019, the unit on the right was burned by Forest Service and TNC working together with other partners. And so that prescribed fire implementation on the ground is what helped save those trees. We saw that the fire behavior was completely different once it hit the areas that had been burned just 2 years before the bootleg fire. And so it's just great to be able to use the preserve and our research and our hard work putting prescribed fire on the ground to manage our ecosystem as also a great learning laboratory for everyone in the world to kind of learn how to adjust to these new climate regime that we're in. So we've been trying to share as much information as we can about forestry management practices, the marsh areas that burned, which I didn't really highlight, but some good portions of the preserve burned in the middle in the marsh. They'll recover quickly. It's just been really fun to see the recovery post-fire happen on the ground. I also had to do quite a bit more fence work. So I actually maintained 75 miles of perimeter fence to keep cattle off the preserve. This is one day where I had to hike in with a chainsaw and hip waders because some places you have trees and wetland and the trees fall on the fence. So yeah, there's plenty of work to do out here. I never get bored because there's always something different times of year to do. And I have my awesome co-pilot there, my dog Bonnie, who has a really silly expression in this picture, but I don't think she'll be too embarrassed. And a lot of our work out here is helped quite a bit by volunteers. And so this particular day I had a volunteer that was willing to do this crazy hard day with me, and I really appreciate it. So please look into volunteering for TNC if you can. Okay, I think I covered everything. Let me know if anybody has questions.
Well, we had a couple of questions come through the chat. Ada was saying that she lives down in the Klamath Basin in the California side, and she's just wondering what the condition of the forest roads are and if there are particular areas that you can stay or camp around there and how you find out about them.
Yeah, Ada, I'll put that last slide back up. It's got my email on it in a second. But
Karen, this is an answer to your question as well.
And so the forest roads, I'm not going to pretend aren't full of potholes. There's definitely just like take it really slow. There's been a lot of traffic through these remote roads the last few years. And I know that the funding for the road crew has gotten cut. So just take it slow. There's a lot to see. So there's, we haven't updated it, but you could find a a driving tour of Sycan Marsh if you Google on the nature.org website, so the Nature Conservancy's website. That might be helpful. But I'm happy to give suggestions about where to stay in camp. There's a Thompson Reservoir campground is pretty close to us. That's where the wolf picture is from. That's across the lake from the campground. But yeah, so pretty wild place up here. So Thompson Reservoir campground, if that's helpful. But here, I'll put the slide back up so you can see my email. It's pretty simple. It's just sarah.ratay@tnc.org. Let me know if you have questions. I'm happy to at least give you suggestions. Okay.
And what other federal campsites? That's recreation.gov.
I don't know because I haven't camped there.
Okay.
I bet it is though. It's a Forest Service managed campground.
Yeah.
And Paul Slichter just put in, because Paul and Susan are great campers, they just put in a link here for us to copy and save of some other camping areas in the Fremont National
Perfect.
Forest.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay,
So-
another question. Well, I guess let's stay on the camping bit. You said that the facility there can host visitors. What does it take to become a visitor?
So I'm really interested in getting better documentation of the biodiversity on the preserve. So if people want to come and take iNaturalist observations and work with me, my schedule and, communicate and stuff, but we can definitely offer camping here. The field station gets used quite a bit by researchers throughout the year, so I'm not sure I can offer that, but I can at least, provide some information and try to encourage iNaturalist observations on the ground here. Because I think I wish I had more time to do biodiversity work here. And so if you can contribute to that, then it satisfies our research purpose.
Yeah. We started last year a BioBlitz on fire burned areas that are coming back up, and we are certainly willing to add that area, the Bootleg Fire or any others down there, are those boundaries we could add into our BioBlitz.
Awesome, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And so we're in the process of planning a joint field trip with the High Desert and Klamath Basin chapters in the NPSO. We're still trying to figure out dates, but sometime mid-June. And so I think, folks should get those newsletters anyways, because they're great chapters. Try to sign up with them to get their newsletter so you get information about the field trip. And that's a pretty prime time to come out to Sycan. So there's also an option.
Well, it sounds like you guys should host annual meeting in a few years.
I'm not sure the field station is that we could try.
No, I mean, the whole society chapter down there.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay, thank you. So I guess other people, Kathy, are asking about plant species lists. And are those available? Are they downloadable? How? You had mentioned 365 taxa. Yeah.
Yeah, if they don't mind just emailing me, that's the easiest way to send them. I don't think it's available online. It was completed in 2005, and so the taxonomy is pretty old school, but I haven't had time to update it.
Okay, and have you tried using the Oregon Flora polygons to pull up the species?
Yes, and so I have compared some. So I'm working on trying to compare those two lists when I have time to do that.
Okay, exactly.
Yeah.
When you're not out mending fence.
Yeah.
Okay, so you did show a couple maps. One had different plant communities, and you showed you told something about the difference between fens and donuts and regular wetland marshes. Okay. Do you have what tools, what GIS or what other kind of tools do you use that show like the soil types and those plants? Are those designations just by boots on the ground plants, or do you use the soils to get a feeling for where the different plants are?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Is that written in? Can I read it?
Well, right now Garrett is asking it again. What
Okay.
soils occur underneath the various ecological zones? And then I know of people that use Google Earth, and you can do soil searches through Google Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's I've read a couple of publications about the soil formation. It was because there's an interesting thing that I'm probably going to get partially wrong, but basically the reason why this sort of basin exists is because of like a drop block, I think it was called, or something. It was like settlement of parent material, or the underlying material of the preserve, and then sediment and stuff is filled in, and so most of what you see is like aggregated sediment
From the volcanism.
well, so that also happened. Yeah, I have so much more to learn, and I love these questions about soil and sampling plants. Doing botany is not directly part of my job. It's something I can't stop doing, obviously, but I don't have a lot of time to do this on the ground. So that's why I'm trying to encourage people that are interested and knowledgeable to come out when they can and contribute to our knowledge.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so just briefly then, can you explain the difference between a regular meadow and a fen? And then what's the difference between a regular fen and a Henderson fen?
Sure, fair question. I'm going to drop my email in here correctly.
I think,
real quick.
oh, did Kieran kind of?
Question.
Yeah.
Definitely use the TNC one. The other one's my personal email. It's tnc.org. So a fen is a wetland that it's similar to a bog, but it is a groundwater sourced wetland. And so as I went to Rick Dewey's talk, I learned that there's a whole bunch of wiggle room in what people consider fens, but because it's a groundwater source wetland, it's considered a fen. It's, persistent standing water. It's been a very dry year for groundwater, like really low levels, but there's still persistent standing water out there. I mean, obviously, if I skied out there right now, there's snow everywhere, and then you see actually there's still pools available, and I see wildlife using the standing water of the fen. There's so many tracks and trails going to that because the standing water somehow it's easier for them to drink than the snow. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's exciting.
was that
And
the
so
whole
then the
question?
meadow just doesn't drain? I mean, the
meadow is
meadows are on
drier.
that hard?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to have that same hard pan that holds standing water in it. Like it is a wet meadow. It's, like in the spring, you're going to want to wear your rubber boots, but it dries out faster. It doesn't have persistent year-round standing water like the fen does.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's see. Was the preserve specifically protected from the bootleg fire? I noticed when you showed the map, it had a part of it that was burned, but then the other parts weren't. And is that because they were moist and didn't burn, or were they specifically protected?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the middle of the preserve is quite wet. It was a dry year. We also, because we had cattle grazing, trespass cattle into other parts of the preserve, and that plague of grasshoppers, there was very little standing vegetation in the middle of the marsh. And so the bootleg fire would burn into the middle of the marsh and then just sort of peter out and finger out, and then often go out because it doesn't have the same residual heat as the hotter, thicker fuels. And so, but the forest kept the fire kept moving through the forest and torching trees. But as the bootleg fire got into the preserve, got into areas where we'd done prescribed fire, it went from a torching crown fire to a creeping 4-foot high fire that was just burning on the little bit of fuel that was left from the 2 years since the prescribed fires that were done in the area.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah. And somebody had asked about beavers. I saw that scrolling through.
Yeah.
So we have a really healthy very aggressive beaver population in Long Creek, especially. They are delightful, a little challenging in terms of our work to try to conserve habitat for the federally threatened bull trout. And the Klamath Basin bull trout is a unique population within bull trout as well that's, you know, has significance for conservation. And so I know there's a lot of people working really hard on bull trout, and the beavers make dams. So like we looked at a 1 mile section of Long Creek, and it had 13 major beaver dams and several small dams within that 1 mile. That pooling that the beaver dams make encourages non-native brook trout. It is better habitat for brook trout. They can outcompete the bull trout in those areas. And so we're studying to see if, you know, we're doing a study with pit tags to see if bull trout can use those areas if they're moving through those beaver dams well. They did evolve together, so beavers and, you know, rare trout species, but there's so many threats to these rare trout species, including the non-native trout, that it's complicated. So we love the beavers. We're glad that they're doing great. They're changing the hydrology on the ground quite a bit. And they were an important, all of that, like beaver modified habitat was very important at slowing down the bootleg fire too. So that's one of the other areas where there's still extant trees, there's aspen groves, and everything was saved because it was flooded, because it's flooded year round by the beavers moving water out of Long Creek into the banks. And just really, I mean, they're amazing habitat engineers.
That's great. So can you see the chat?
Yes.
Sometimes people can't see the chat.
I won't catch everything, so
That's, yeah, okay. So I was going back up to that one from, oh, there, Adam. Okay, and then Jason just added to the beaver question or observations. It says regarding beavers, hydrology, and the straightened channels and the ditching observed in one of the photos, is anything being done to restore the nature hydrology within the marsh?
Yeah, so in the last decade, some of my coworkers have done quite a bit of work to restore hydrologic connections. It's challenging. There's a very little grade, very little elevation out on the marsh surface itself. And there were a lot of modifications to the hydrology of the preserve. So there's still stuff you can see from Google Maps on the ground on the preserve, but we've tried to at least restore function, if not all the aesthetic and land movement. But we're working with Natural Resource Conservation Service to do some further habitat work on the preserve. And there's always more work to do, but.
Yeah, excellent. And then Elaine Stewart just added that beaver impoundments do serve to recharge the groundwater. And as what you were saying, it really helped when the fires came through.
Absolutely.
Okay. Have there been any partnerships with the local tribes and bands to conduct these cultural burns and share the traditional fire ecology knowledge? Or
absolutely.
DK,
so yeah, we are so interested in that. And so especially this year, this fall, we actually did so there's, you know, let me back up a little bit. So there's this tradition of doing fire on the ground that has nothing to do with the governmental organizations and the certification and stuff. But now to do fire on preserves, people have to be certified. And so we actually did a training with the Klamath tribe to try to help more tribe members get NSWG certified, so that they had red cards, so that they could, you know, both have that documentation. So myself personally, I think of myself as, you know, helping to steward this preserve for continuity into the future. And so I hope someday this preserve can, you know, become part of the Klamath tribe holding, but I don't, I can't speak for TNC about the timeline of that or when it makes sense for the tribe, but we try to consult every, we try to ask the questions and do like meaningful consultation with the tribe as much as possible. There's so many limitations in terms of just like our work time and our ability to do projects and stuff. And so I think we're getting better every year. We were able to help a lot of, especially younger fire practitioners, learn about fire and get to implement it on the ground. And so that's something I'm really proud of. But I think all of us all organizations can do better at that too. So we're striving to do the best we can.
Yeah, thank you. I can't remember his name, but we had a program with Chris through OSU, and I think he was talking about doing some of that training.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so it's good.
Yeah, we got to share the love, the fire love, It's so fun to get to see people that have never run a drip torch, get to do that, or, also to learn how, historically people would ignite fire, just, carrying bundles and, other ways. And the closeness that takes is almost like you just learn so much more from that than just, holding a thing in your hand. That just, it's been interesting to try to absorb and help encourage everybody's ability to do fire safely.
Well, it's that knowledge of what fire is and can do. It's like an electrician, right? Knows electricity and what it can and cannot do and how to handle it. Yeah. Okay, back to the fens. Are there Darlingtonia there, or what other carnivorous plants?
So I wish there were Darlingtonia. I assume that it maybe the cold is part of the limitation, but I don't know. So we have 2 species of sundew, Drosera, and we have 2 species of bladderworts. For some reason, I'm blanking on the genus, which is funny because I say them all the time. Anyway, yeah. So we have 4 carnivorous plant species of the two types.
Cool.
Yeah. Sometimes I feed the sundews mosquitoes. So there are a lot of mosquitoes. Nobody asked about that yet, but in the spring, there are a fair amount of mosquitoes, but it's really not as bad as you might think for as much water we have on the landscape sometimes. But yeah, just to, try to feed the sundews when you can.
Oh, that's exciting. Okay. So what soils occur underneath the various ecological regions within the marsh?
I wish I could answer that question. We definitely have a lot of areas of exposed bedrock, the scablands as they're called. Otherwise, yeah, it can read a little more. Yeah. Right,
like that whole Modoc province of the basalt and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's especially on the east side of the preserve. There's a lot of that, but there's so much. I mean, yeah, it's
okay. Elaine put a resource in Web Soil Survey, and that they provide soil maps. So, and then Dogami also, you could get soil maps off of Dogami.
Great. See, there's a lot of mosquito questions.
And here's another resource that Kieran put in, Cassoil resource. Anyway, that's in the chat if anybody's interested. It's a UC Davis program. So, good. I'm going to have to save the chat. Okay. And Sarah, just to confirm your email, it's sarah.ratay@tnc.com.
No.
.org.
ORG, because we're a nonprofit.
Okay, good. So we will do that. Okay, there's the web soil. It's written correctly. Thank you. And there, Willow's got that. Okay. Now Beth has added that rich fens have a minor trophic hydrology, simply meaning that the water chemistry drives what species are common. So buckbean and bog birch and others are the same for bends both in Oregon and Minnesota and Iowa.
Yeah, it's such an interesting comment. I'm
I
excited to
know.
hear more about that.
Well, it's kind of like that whole acidity thing back to the Darlingtonia or all those too. The species Sarah showed are the same as the minor trophic fens in Minnesota. She
So-
just moved to Portland from there, so we will have to find out more about those. Thank you very much, Beth Markart.
We are considered a rich fen. My understanding is that is because the water has a lot of cations in it. Oh man, I should have read that publication again for this. But yeah, I can send out the publication on the fen too if people are interested. It's really fascinatingly done. John Christie wrote that in the 90s, I think. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, we actually have a hike going in July on a fen up at Government Camp area. So might do some comparisons.
excited for it to stop snowing and there to be flowers.
I know. Well, believe me, we've had plenty of snow up here too. Okay, so we have the beaver. Lamakotsky does firework in Southern
Lamakotsky.
Oregon.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
also partners with the Klamath Bird Observatory.
yeah. And they've done work here on the preserve too. They do great job.
Track. Yeah, you mentioned that there were a lot of different flocks coming through. Oh, and about those mosquitoes, when does the season start and end?
Yeah, so there's this beautiful, like 2 weeks after the snow all melts before the mosquitoes start. It's pretty quick. This year, I don't know. I mean, we don't normally get this amount of snow in March. So I don't know when that's going to be exactly. And then August, usually they're done by. But if you wait till August, you'll miss most of the flowers. So you should just come in June. But, you know, wear a little mosquito spray. It's not as bad as you think. I've been in much, much worse places.
There you go. Sounds like Mount Adams area. You have to wait to August, but the flowers are gone. How about any snakes?
Yeah, we have a lot of garter snakes. There's a couple other species of snakes on the species list. I think rosy boa. We don't have rattlesnakes. We don't have poison oak. We don't have cactus, obviously. It's pretty cush, I gotta say, except for the mosquitoes.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, Jason Clinch reiterated that the soil mapping is on Google Earth as well. Okay, how about other trees other than your aspen and your ponderosas? Do western juniper encroach at all? Or is it too wet, or is elevation a detriment?
We have quite a bit of juniper, yeah, especially on the east side of the preserve, which is a little more of Great Basin influence. So there is the winter rim to the east of us, which is really cool. That's here, I'll take off my video for a second. This is from the winter rim looking down to Summer Lake. It's a really cool spot. It's not a great picture of it, but you should go check that out too if you're out here.
It's very dry.
Yeah. Summer Lake is an alkali basin. Sorry, what was the question?
Oh, western juniper.
Yeah, definitely. So there's like the Great Basin ecoregion, comes right next to the preserve. We're in the eastern Cascades, but there's definitely components of both. And the just north of us on the way to Thompson Reservoir is where the divide between the Klamath Basin and Great Basin hydrologic areas happens. So we are very much an ecotone. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And let's see, Gerhardt Mountain, that is like southeast.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Gerhardt was burned very hot in the fire in Bootleg. Haven't been up there since the fire, but.
And do you have to still have permits to get in there?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, not sure.
Okay, and Beth just explained more about the minotrophic, meaning rich in minerals like calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. The most intensely is the calcareous, fen, and that hosts mostly rare plants. The calciphiles. Okay.
I can't wait to hear more. Just email me.
Yeah. I know. She says something, oh, yes, send publication, please.
Yes, so yeah,
Okay, and so wet, dry, okay, Carolyn wants to know about ticks.
I have seen one tick here once.
There you go. It is a sweet spot, isn't it?
It's pretty great.
Okay, so there's Sarah. Oh, what kind of birds are common or are common to there that are unusual for the rest of Oregon?
Well, I have to complain about the cranes. They're just too loud sometimes first thing in the morning. No, they're lovely. It's so magical to hear them. So yeah, we have, you know, sandhill cranes nest here and have colts here. I don't know. We used to do so much research out here. We used to have a lot of staff and they were studying nest success and stuff. I don't know anymore, but I've definitely seen babies out here on the landscape. We have both tundra and trumpeter swans that come through. We have so many ibises. It's so great. That'll be my favorite bird. I saw that question. I just love an ibis. I don't know. They're so silly. I have a little video that's just like a flock of them just like flying around. So great. We have historically, we had yellow rail population. So I say historically, but it was only 10 years ago that they were quite commonly found here breeding and during breeding time. And so if you guys don't know about yellow rails, basically it's a bird that's in wetlands on the East Coast. And then there's this tiny population just Southern Oregon, maybe a little bit into California, I can't remember. And it's you know, and that's it. And so there's a lot of really cool folks doing research at Klamath Wildlife Refuge and other places, and Ken Popper's working on a species assessment for them. So we've surveyed it for yellow rails here, which consists of walking around in the middle of the night, banging two rocks together because that sounds like their call, and waiting to hear if we hear back from territorial males. We haven't had any success yet, but I think part of the problem is there hasn't been much residual plant material because of the grasshoppers and the cows. I'm really excited. This is the first year where we don't have a grazing lease. I didn't mention, but 25 miles of fence line were damaged by bootleg. And so I've had to replace all of that. So this is the first season that we will hopefully be able to keep most of the cows off the preserve.